Atlas Pandemica, Maps to a Kinder World, is a project by the Stove Network designed to encourage pioneering approaches in charting the changes that have happened since the outbreak of COVID-19 locally, and tries to navigate the way forward into a more hopeful and shared future. In this series, Stove orchestrator Matt Baker speaks with the artists, writers and researchers involved in the project, offering an insight into the process and discoveries each have made. We hope you enjoy.
Welcome to Atlas Pandemica podcast number 3. I'm Matt Baker, and along with artist Robbie Coleman, I'm one of the curators of the project. Atlas Pandemica Maps to a Kinder World is a compendium of 10 projects led by creative people, each investigating a different theme highlighted by life during the COVID pandemic. Projects work directly with people in Dumfries and Galloway, focusing on the impacts and the learning from the community's experience of the evolving pandemic. Atlas Pandemica was conceived and is managed by community-led arts organisation, the Stove Network. It explores local responses to the pandemic and how these might shape new approaches to our shared future. The project is supported by Scottish Government's Supporting Communities Fund. You can find more info at www.atlaspandemica.org. In this series, I'll be talking to each of the artists leading one of the Atlas explorations. And today, I'm delighted to be joined by Mark Zygadlo. Mark is an artist and a maker who's been living in rural Nithsdale since 1980. His current diverse working practice has started at what feels like home in kinetic artwork after an interesting journey, as he describes it. He started with making large abstract color paintings in the 1970s, branching out into cabinet making and restoration, and then into wood carving and boat building. Another pathway led to writing, academic research, collaboration in performance projects, public art events, and community projects. And he says that the Atlas Pandemica project has provided a pathway into working with increasingly urgent environmental social issues, which are expected to become a major element of both motivation and his focus. So, welcome, Mark.
Hello.
Right, I'm going to dive straight in. Your project is called Landwatership. What is Landwatership?
Well, yeah, it's a I don't know what the right word is, a portmanteau term, maybe. Is that the right word? It's a sort of conflation of a lot of things that I've been thinking about and worrying about, actually, for quite a while. Going back even to Yves, a couple of things at Yves. I made the journey to Yves walking up the waterways.
We should explain that Yves is Environmental Art Festival Scotland, yeah?
Yes.
On you go.
Walking up the waterways from Dumfries, so it was, I don't know, I guess it was about 20 odd miles or something up there, over a couple of days. And during that walk, I started worrying about the term landscape. And then there was an event led by Bill Coleman at Yves, which addressed that really pretty head on. So, I mean, that was lucky coincidence from my point of view. How did that make me? I was worrying about landscape as it seems to separate the viewer from what they're looking at, their field of vision. And so I started looking into what the sort of etymology of landscape, and I found that very instructive. Land as a description of an area that's populated by its people, so identified by its people. And then scape could be rooted in two words, both German, and landscape came into the English language through Dutch, really, and it was merely as a way of distinguishing one kind of painting from another. So outdoor painting from portraiture, basically. That's how we started to use landscape. I don't know what we referred to, what we see outside, how we referred to it before that. But anyway, that seems to be where it came from. And that's probably 17th century or 16th century. the ship suffix to that has got two roots. One of them is just shape, but the other one refers really to the condition of being that. So rather like ownership or I don't know, stewardship or something like that. It's about what it is to be that thing. So that really was a clue to what I started to feel about where I live, really. And it also gave me another perspective onto my own work. I mean, a recent work like Water Organ, for instance, could be interpreted as a piece of watership in that it addressed what was involved in being that water. It explored the sort of nature of being that thing. So when it came to the Atlas, this is a long explanation, I'm sorry, Matt. When it came to the Atlas Pandemica thing, I was interested in water. Water was my first sort of concern, but then water really, exists as so much as part of the land that it seemed to me impossible to separate the two. And then as I started to think about what I wanted to look at as the Atlas Pandemica thing, it seemed to me that combination of things looked at from the perspective of what I've just been talking about. In other words, the not being separated from it, being embedded in those elements that we live in, particularly in a rural area like this. That was a good starting point, really. So in a way, Landwatership as a name was this kind of speculative title as a stepping off point. It was the sort of lens that I wanted to use to look at where I lived and the waterways. And in my description at the beginning of the project, I used the word matrix, which I only just remembered yesterday reading through my notes, which actually is a really good term. Again, the kind of etymology is interesting, comes from the same root as the word mother and refers to the womb, really. Matrix, as a place that things originate, as a place that things start, as a place that things form. And so I started to think of Landwatership as the matrix for possible change. And the circumstances around us at the moment, the direct thing was the COVID pandemic, but much more significant in the longer term is this environmental situation.
So kind of, we're talking about a sort of an origin idea of, and a sense of being, a kind of that you can't separate the people from the thing that we're talking about.
Yes,
the combination.
Exactly, and the thing that it's funny when sometimes when the most obvious things that you've been looking at all your life basically suddenly appear to you as a revelation, and in a way that's the kind of experience I had at the beginning of this project. And it just dawned on me in a way that it hadn't really before, that we are completely embedded, whether we like it or not, whatever we pretend, we are completely embedded in our environment. And the way that I expressed that at the beginning of the project is that no part of us is unaffected by where we live, and no part of where we live is unaffected by us. It's a completely embedded.
Yeah, I remember you saying that at the beginning. It's very powerful.
Yeah, and it was very important as the initial motivation, really.
So Okay, so there was the motivation, that was the lens and the idea that you were looking at. So your initial ambition was to look at the whole catchment, which is one of the primary rivers of our region. So how did you set about that?
Well, I didn't actually. It was hugely overambitious. Maybe that's the requisite for creative work. To have an unwieldy and completely impracticable idea, and then kind of work towards something that is achievable. Anyway, I mean, this came about. I started with that idea, and I went and looked at and spoke to various people to do with the river and so on, and starting to form a plan about how I could look at it. And just as a sort of trial run, I took a walk out of my back door up the burn that runs past the village here. And I realized in doing that, that it was going to be impossible in any meaningful detail to look at something as big as the Nith. It's just much too big for,
There's an interesting thing there, isn't there? I think, when you said about that creative ambition, maybe it is part of how creative people need to start with a big thing. Because I mean, so often I've been in conversations with people who have power or permission responsibility around projects, and you go to them with your big idea, and you get this kind of like, you've got to be joking look on their faces of like, you're not hoping, but it's somehow it's part of the process that we need to sort of put ourselves through as creative people, is to sort of like start with that and then bring it down. So you brought it down to Glenmidge Burn.
Yeah.
So I think, obviously very few people listening to this will have any idea about Glenmidge Burn. So could you describe the Glenmidge catchment and your own personal relationship to it?
Yeah. I think the first thing to say in that is that Glenmidge Burn is a kind of version of every burn. There's nothing amazing or spectacular about it. And so the things that I discovered or that I noticed about it and have been thinking about it and working with refer to every burn really, in this kind of landscape. And I apologize for using that word. Right, sorry, Matt. What was the question again?
Tell us about the Glenmidge Burn and your own relationship to it. Also, we should probably, there might be people listening from other parts of the world, we should explain when we're saying burn, it's the Scots word for a small river. I don't even know what
stream, yes.
A stream. Sorry, yeah,
yes.
Stream. Okay.
Yes.
On you go.
Right. Well, the Glenmidge Burn is a very modest little burn, and in mid-Nithsdale, and it rises on a hill called Wallace Hall Hill, which is sort of between, where would you say it was, between Aldgirth and Dunsker, Wollaston sort of area. The total catchment is 7.7 square kilometers, just under 3 square miles, so it's not big. The top of it is some 900 and something feet, and the river, where it flows into the river, is about 75 feet. So there's 800 and odd feet. I can't find the figure right in front of me now, but that sort of height. So, and the land of the catchment is really two distinct monocultures. It's either grassland or forestry plantation. Some interesting, one of the first things I found out about the catchment, I mean, and this is true of everywhere, but it completely surprised me and really impressed me, is that over the area of, in this area, the average rainfall is something like 1.2 meters of rain per year. And if you just extrapolate that over the square area of the catchment, something like 9 million tons of water falls on us in this catchment in a year. And that is a fantastic amount of water. And it's a small area. If you extend that to the area of the Nith, that's thousands of millions of tons of water that fall on the Nith catchment area. And something like 62%, something like that, is runoff. So the rest of it will be taken up by plants, and it goes into a different hydrological cycle. It will evaporate eventually, or is, drunk or whatever.
62% of that enormous number of tons goes down the Glenmidge Burn.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So 62% of 9 million tons. So it's about, I think it was 5.9 million tons runs into the Nith from a burn that's, I don't know, 6 to 8 inches deep and maybe, 3 feet wide. I mean, it's just amazing. I was completely amazed by that. And it seemed to me that, well, there's an enormous potential, which is just in terms of energy, which is running away. There's a whole purpose to it as well, in that, this is a kind of washing process, let's say. It's also a wasting process. Lots of things are washed away down the burn, which, and it's a habitat for all sorts of life. So it's a fascinating bit of.
How did you then set about exploring Landwatership within this 3
right.
miles?
Well, I sort of forgot about Landwatership then, because it's quite a complicated, concept. Except that I set about walking. I just set about being in the catchment. I walked the burn top to bottom, bottom to top, and I walked every tributary that I could. There were parts where I couldn't get permission to go, and there were parts where it was kind of dangerous to go because of beasts and so on. And as a part of the project is about how the people are integrated with the place that they live and the water and the land and so on, the last thing I wanted to do was to alienate my neighbours. And in fact, I set out the very first day in fact, it was the walk that where I decided that the Nith was much more than I could deal with. But I met one of my neighbours who I had not met before, and I was just blithely wandering across his piece of ground, and he asked me what I was doing, and we got off on, well, potentially we might have got off on really seriously on the wrong foot. I mean, I think we were both making an effort not to, and so it was fine in the end. But I realized that I was out of order, really. That although we have access to everywhere, in theory, that in that particular case, it was a sensitive area of ground that I was wandering across, and should have asked first, really. So I don't know why I'm telling you that story, but
did that give you the idea to involve your neighbours?
No, I wanted to do that anyway, but I mean, this was before I had this was before I'd even thought that Glenmidge Burn was going to be enough to look at, or conversely, that the Nith was going to be too much to look at. But it was very instructive in that, it just gave me a new slant on that right to roam.
Yeah.
Business. I mean, mostly in a small area like this. I mean, we've got some 45 households or something in the catchment, and I realised, I kind of made a list and counted it up and everything, and I already knew half the people, so I introduced myself to the other half and told them all about the project and things like that.
And how did those conversations go? What did you tell them you would do?
Yes, it's difficult to describe what I was doing, but actually, what made it very difficult to describe what I was doing was that I didn't know what I was doing right at the beginning. So I was trying to describe a starting point, and not very successfully, and also running into trouble when people were saying, well, what's it about, why are you doing it, and so on. But for the most part, people are just great. People are interested, and they contribute. When you ask them, they got positive things to say about it. So 99% of that was really positive.
We've got to remember within that time, we were talking about lockdown time. People weren't, everybody was really quite focused on where they live, because we were restricted by that. Yeah. And there was that amazing spring, which springing this morning as well. Was that focus that people had, or a renewed interest in what was around them? Did that sort of feed into the project at all?
It definitely did. How can I put it? I think the lockdown circumstances, as soon as I mentioned that in terms of the project, then that's a definite hook of people's interest. And partly because there's an atmosphere, there was, and I think it probably is more of an atmosphere of uncertainty now than there was then, in a way. And that's an interesting aspect of the project, which I suppose, if any elements of it continue, the length of time that the lockdown and the travel restrictions and the feeling of insecurity are with us, I think there's a quite a profound change that's going on. And at the beginning, when I first went to meet people, as well as there being that sort of atmosphere of uncertainty, there was a kind of euphoria, and it's difficult to kind of put your finger on why that was there, because it's a frightening moment, really. But we live in a place and that's an aspect of landwatership, let's say, which is very sustaining in circumstances like that. I often, and we often spoke about that with people that I met through the project, was what would this be like if we lived in in the middle of a city, in a tower block or something like that, where we don't have this kind of area to sustain us. And that difficult to articulate, even for me to articulate, and it's kind of part of my language anyway, but quite difficult for lots of people to talk about that, really.
And So what did you learn about your area then? Because I remember you talking about those sort of really quite significant insights that you got into how the land was working and its long term. You know, you talk about sustaining, but its sustainability.
Sorry, I missed the end of that. It's just...
what you learned about the land and those insights you talked about how you suddenly saw how the land was working. It was sort of like scales had dropped from your eyes. I remember you talking about.
Yeah, well, actually, I can't remember exactly what I was referring to then, except that that's quite a general feeling that I've had throughout the whole project. I mean, it's been amazingly valuable, amazingly poignant in a way for me, this. But in terms of, yes, what I said earlier about this being like two monocultures, really. The grassland and softwood plantations are, yeah, that was also quite shocking in a way to I mean, again, it's been staring me in the face for the last 30 years or whatever that I've lived in this place, but to actually walk around the whole area and see that that is truly all there is. And the effect that it's had, which, thinking back, is quite marked. Mm-hmm. The effect on species diversity and so on, even in the time that we've been living here. You know, we don't get curlews anymore here. We don't get oyster catchers. There used to be lots and lots of large seasonal birds that came in, which now there aren't. And yeah, so that's
I mean, so that quality of sustaining, in every sense of the word, is feeling diminished. Is what I'm getting at, and yes. Then, yeah, and that, you know, because you're talking about, yeah, it was sustaining for people in a different way to people who are in cities, but somehow that's been impoverished, and then you went about sort of using your catchment as a sort of like a mini country in a way, and then testing out societal policies like land management policies and what those would how those would impact your area. Can you sort of talk about what you did with that?
Yeah, well, I kind of pursued the project by making a series of maps, and the clues in the name of the project, by the way. So I made I used as my base map the 1843 Ordnance Survey, which is a 6-inch map, and it's got amazing detail, 6 inches to the mile scale map, and fantastic detail. And when I sort of got a close look at this actual map, I realized that very, very little has changed in the area since then. So in whatever that is, 160, 170 years or something. Even field boundaries and things like that are marked on that map. So it's very, very detailed, and the changes have been were interesting. So I sort of applied them to the original base map incrementally, and it seemed to me that what I was making then, or what I was looking at a palimpsest upside down, if you see what I mean. I was making the layers on the map, and then up to the present day. So starting with the 1843, there are some new houses that have been changed and things like that. There are power lines and so on imposed on that map, and then it occurred to me that the thing to do was to continue this process into possible futures. And that's interesting what we were saying just now about that living in this kind of area is sustaining in a way, and it had sustained people, but the contrast, as you said, in that it is not sustainable for the majority of species that one would expect to encounter in this place. So, I mean, the three things that I looked at, I looked at food, because that's what this is. This is a food factory in a way, or the majority of it is anyway. I looked at food, I looked at power, because that seems to be one of our biggest necessities, and one of our most damaging ones. And I looked at species diversity. And I've got to say, not in really great detail, but just in a kind of general sense of ways that we could address those as key influences of the shape that our future is going to be. So I made a series of maps then addressing those things. And food, I mean, it just occurred to me that, here we are, this is an agrarian society that we live in, the whole of Europe, basically. There's no significant synthetic food made anywhere. We are basically still agrarian. And however we like to think about it, that's what it all comes down to. In this catchment, there are probably 4 working farms, but they're basically, by a long way, roundabout route, feeding all of us. But my view of it is it's become a very, very complicated equation that everything produced here quite intensively has to be shipped out, and it's mostly meat. It's entirely, meat and dairy. It has to get shipped out to be processed, and then we go out to buy it back in. But we don't actually buy what's produced here. Sorry about that. We don't buy what's produced here. It's it's kind of random, and that seems to me, especially if we're going to have to start thinking about food miles and about waste, that's a really significant thing that can be addressed. Food waste, 30%. We're throwing away 30% of the food we produce.
Yeah. So
which means that 30% of the land is being farmed. I mean, the whole combination of things here, and I could start to rant, Matt. So if I do, just stop me. I'm a farm boy originally, and so I remember this stuff happening in the 50s. Subsidies coming in. They came in under the sort of guise of marketing boards in the old days. There was milk marketing board, meat marketing board. There were marketing boards for cereals and so on, potatoes, everything. And basically, farms, because of this subsidy, farms started to specialize. And we are now at the peak of that farms actually are completely unsustainable without the subsidy, because our food policy is insane. Food is much too cheap. And it's so cheap that we can throw away 30% of it. I mean, it's a very simple equation in a way. I don't know why anybody has followed it. And I feel very sorry for farmers because they've been led by the nose. You can't sustain a farm in this economic climate without getting the subsidy. And to get the subsidy, you have to farm intensively. You have
to follow the rules. Yeah,
yeah.
You're trapped in the circle, aren't you?
Yeah.
I mean, So you were putting forward sort of effectively sample scenarios about how the future of Glenmidge Burn could go and what was the response from, because you were working with people all the way through on that. So did people get fired up about particular ideas that they wanted to follow through, or how did that go?
Actually, the most popular one is about power generation.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are enthusiastic about food, and there's a kind of informal whole food purchasing collective here. We club together with quite a few people around, but that actually extends way beyond the catchment. But it's kind of delivered here in the catchment. So in a way, there is a sort of attention being paid to an alternative view of food, let's say. But some people were interested in the idea of it's interconnected with the diversity thing, taking a proportion of land out of intensive production and allowing it for rewilding, so that that you can encourage a rediversification and a regeneration of native species. But there's quite a complicated discussion going on about that generally, about what constitutes rewilding, because if you say to lots of people, well, let's just take this piece of land, and interesting here, because part of this catchment, probably about, I don't know, 25% of it is a part of a big estate, and they because of the scale of it, they can sort of address those as realistic issues, whereas on an ordinary farm of 300-400 acres, you can't. You've got to use every square inch to get your subsidy. Discussion about what rewilding is. If you want to achieve genuinely wild area, it doesn't look very nice for a start, and it could take 100 years. So there are discussions about how you do that, whether you should fence off these areas, whether you should deliberately plant things. It is quite complicated. So that sort of discussion meant that topic didn't get very far in a way. Yeah. Whereas the idea of generating power, that's relatively simple, because there are various options, and there is, what's available here in terms of, the opportunities of where the river could supply power. We've got some hilltops that you could use, and so on. So that's fairly easy to make a kind of scheme, and in fact, the part of that could tie in quite well with the horticulture aspect, and people got interested in the power thing.
That's great.
It's a sexier sort of topic, really. It doesn't require so much digging.
I mean, after all this research and working with people, how did you draw it together into some sort of communicable thing, and what do you hope that people will get from that?
I don't think I really have drawn it together very successfully.
Why not?
I think because it's, I mean, if it has any merit, it's that it's really the very beginning of something. And it's just impossible to make any sort of conclusion, I would say, at this stage. The speculative part of it, which is, the interesting bit, because basically we're right in the shit, and I think everybody sees that. even, and that's, I mean, there is an element of my project which is quite gloomy, and looking at things like, and I found it impossible not to be affected by world events, even though my focus was on, like on a single grain of sand on the beach kind of thing. What was going on in America, for instance, with the elections there. And well, there are various other things were kind of pressing in on me as I was thinking about this. And overall, we really are in a mess. And so
I think that
in terms of drawing it together, I think, I felt it's probably a pointless task.
It's beyond the brief. I think you're right. I mean, I think there's something in that initiating bit there around creative process. We talked about how you start with a grand idea to almost get yourself going, then you focus in, and then what you come out with is a number of other potential directions and things that other people can pick up on. And I think that sort of community visioning process is a really valuable aspect of how we're functioning as artists these days, in the sense of understanding the needs of our society in terms of being in the shit, as you describe it, and having that process, because I mean, I think there's something fundamental in the Atlas Pandemica approach that we were encouraging people to work without an end result in mind. It was like, you don't come to us with I'm going to make this thing. Come with an exploratory process, in your case Landwatership. So I mean, and how was the experience for you of like working with that without that end product, because you are somebody that's traditionally made things that you
no, absolutely blissful, really. And perfect for this kind of application. It is just the beginning, and in your notes, where do you go from here? That's the really interesting question. How do we take it on? I don't know. I mean, I've made these. All they are is suggestions, really. It's just like putting your toe in the water and seeing if it's worth going a bit further with it, really.
But there's foundations in those suggestions that you've got, because you've got a sort of constituency of people who are engaged in that process. So
I'm really flattered by the way you're saying this about how I've engaged the community. It's not I mean, I have spoken to everybody, but there's we haven't got an action group or anything like that,
No.
But
I don't think that's the point. I think it's a raising of consciousness, gradually giving people the agency and the empowerment to sort of like think, we could actually maybe do something about that. Do you remember Crazy Mark, who used to walk around the rivers? Maybe we should go talk to him about that. Could we do something more with that? Because I mean, it is like dropping a pebble into a pond in a way, isn't it? And then seeing the ripples and seeing people catch the ripples, and it's an energy process. Yeah.
And the most surprising and in a way kind of proof of that particular pudding is that a project which kind of arose as part of this actually came to fruition during the period of the Atlas Pandemica project, and that was a footpath which had. When I was talking about the right to roam, one of the problems in Scotland is because we can go anywhere, nobody's really bothered about maintaining old rights of way, and so they tend to be just ignored and forgotten. but there's quite an interesting one. Just actually, part of it is only in the catchment, not all of it, but it starts. One end of it is in the catchment, and just through a series of conversations with various people, and with the farmer or two farmers whose land it goes over, people got interested and excited about this footpath, and it has been re-established. So
well, there you go. You're doing yourself down and going, oh, I didn't really do that much with the people. It's like, because I mean, how many times have we all been somewhere and gone, oh, somebody should do something about this, or what a shame.
Well,
and there you go. And that's something that
yes, but it was like all the planets lining up, at a particular moment, and we just happened to be there at the right time. And well, any creative moment is like that, I think, or has an element of that in it, and it's just really, it was a piece of the most amazing luck that has.
But do you not think it actually takes that? I know exactly what you mean, and but it actually takes work to be in the right place, to have that luck. You make that luck. I mean, I've heard people talk about, the sort of like having an idea to have an idea. You have to invest that energy into a process to create those moments of magic. Yeah. And
I say to everybody that I have the opportunity that ideas are for free. You can sit in the bath and have an idea. It doesn't mean a thing, really.
But keeping at it and keeping talking to people, it does make it. I firmly believe that it makes those magic moments happen. I really, It's paying attention. It's paying attention to things. If somebody is sort of the custodian of a place or of an idea or of a bit of land or whatever, in terms of the way that they're paying attention to it, they're going to catch those moments. Like you're going to see the moment when it comes, and you're going to be able to build on it. We talked quite a lot about future stuff. Have you got ideas about where you would like to take the project next, or you'd like others to take it, or?
I think that you've kind of hit the nail on the head in a way, that this is no longer, this can't work as a single project like this. Really, this needs now to have a group of people who want to, who kind of sharing some kind of desire to push things forward. And so Atlas Pandemica may be, or my Landwatership part of it may be an element of that, I think. And so I'm thinking, how could that be done? How could that be achieved? It's a question.
We'll just stay focused, right? We'll just stay attentive. And I mean, Atlas Pandemica, there's going to be a publication that comes out about it. These podcasts are going to go out there. You've made one of your maps as part of that Atlas Pandemica publication, and there's a futures document that's coming out with it as well. That's a sort of like a larger proposal about how do we take forward this idea of creative engagement in society as a means of rethinking and building back better in our society. So and I think Landwatership is an amazing example of that, of a sort of, as you said, the world in a grain of sand. There's a lot of grains of sand out there, and policy tends to come down to us as these huge, exactly like you're talking about the farming subsidies of these sort of blunt instruments, basically, and we need to be thinking in terms of the detail.
Yes,
building up. I think your project shows that in an amazing way.
Yeah. I mean, there's another example in this context which exactly exemplifies that, and that is about power generation. That at the moment the model is for these huge generating plants, which had been developed with things like nuclear power in mind, or massive coal generating plants and everything, and the power comes down a kind of root system in a way, so we each have a little bit coming into our houses. But since the advent of micro generation, of which there is quite a lot, there's none in the catchment, but there's quite a lot sort of further up the Nith. Because of the design of the grid, no more power can actually be shoved in at the bottom. What it was doing at the bottom was just sort of doing little hops kind of up a root system, and then this is how I understand it. I may be completely wrong about this, but that it's very difficult to push any more power in right at the bottom at the lower voltage things. So what's really needed is a complete rethink of the grid. That this is meaningless now, the top-down thing, because on every hilltop round here there's a wind generator, and this is the potential. Think of that 1,000 million tons or several 1,000 million tons of water running down the Nith. Yeah. There's an extraordinary energy in
what we've got to be thinking about is using the energy closer to the source.
Exactly.
Because as a region, we're a net exporter of renewable energy now, but there actually isn't a big enough cable to take it all out of the region. So that's what we've got to be thinking about in terms of like our economic strategy for our region. We actually need to be using power. Everyone's sort of like use less power. Dumfries and Galloway should be thinking about how do we build a future where we use the power that we've got, and we can you can then imagine a sort of an idea that where the rural areas start to become the places that where things are made and things happen, because that's exactly you go to the power in the same way that you used to go to where the coal mine was, or this is where we need to be, and that move just people are not waking up to that at the moment.
No, and the other thing is that in the transmission of power, so much is lost if it's got to go long distances. So the idea is kind of occurring now, I think, anyway, and certainly we've been talking about it here, is that the grid looks like a network, like a net, and inside, and that's not necessarily a network that's configured on catchment areas, because they're not necessarily related, but that networks of areas that can produce enough to service their cell in the network, but balance up, the deficiencies or whatever of the cells around them in a kind of two-way balancing thing. On a local level, certainly in rural areas, that could work really well. Yeah. That could work really well because if we're going to have electric vehicles, which we're going to have to start thinking about, then all these things, that's going to put a different sort of pressure on the grid as it is at the moment, and it's not really designed for that. So, that sort of rethinking really is
doing it at that micro level.
It's the same story for each of those things I've looked at.
And you started from bottom up. Now that's just been fascinating, Mark. I mean, we've gone from Glenmidge Burn to national power policy to national food policy, and every part of the globe could do that story, and that's the point. And I think that's what's so wonderful about what you've done, Mark. It's been wonderful to talk. I mean, we need to do a series this week. Mark on energy this week. Mark on food policy. Brilliant. Well, we are going to have to bring it to a close for this one. Yeah. Mark, thank you so much. That's been the whole thing has been a pleasure. Wonderful to talk to you. Thank you. Cheers, Mark.